The clock that never stops. The old antique shop. Elliot had never been superstitious. He didn't believe in ghosts, curses, or haunted objects, but that was before he bought the clock. It happened on a cold October afternoon. He was wandering through a dusty antique shop when he spotted it. A grandfather clock, tall and elegant, its wood dark and polished despite its age. Something about it called to him. The shopkeeper, an elderly woman, gave him a strange look. "That's not for sale," she muttered. Elliot frowned. "It has a price tag." She hesitated. Then, after a long pause, she whispered, "It doesn't keep time. It keeps things inside." Elliot laughed. "You trying to scare me?" She shook her head. "Just don't let it stop." Elliot didn't listen. He should have. 2. The clock starts ticking. Elliot brought the grandfather clock home that evening. It fit perfectly in his living room, tall, imposing, strangely out of place. At exactly 11 p.m., the clock hands began to move. Tick, tick, tick. Each sound echoed through the house, louder than a normal clock should be. Elliot shook his head. Old clocks were loud, nothing strange about it. Then at 3 a.m., the clock chimed once, a single deep note that vibrated through the floor. Elliot sat up in bed, heart pounding. The room felt different, like something had changed, like something had arrived. 3. The shadows in the reflection. By the next morning, Elliot forgot about the clock until he noticed the mirror. It was in the hallway near the clock, and something about it seemed wrong. When he walked past, he caught a glimpse of movement, something standing behind him. A shape, tall, distorted, but when he turned, nothing. Elliot swallowed. Just my imagination. Then the clock chimed again, this time twice, and suddenly a whisper brushed against his ear. "You let it start." The dream that wasn't a dream that night. Elliot had a nightmare. He was standing in his living room, facing the clock. The hands were spinning wildly, faster than they should, and the pendulum wasn't swinging. Instead, something was inside the glass. A man. His skin was gray, his eyes hollow, and his mouth stitched shut. Elliot tried to move, but couldn't. Then slowly the figure lifted a finger and pointed right at him. Elliot woke up gasping for air, and downstairs, the clock was ticking louder than ever. 5. The clock won't stop. Over the next few days, the house changed. The air felt heavier, shadows moved where they shouldn't, and every night at exactly 3 a.m., the clock chimed. Each night, one more chime than before. By the 6th night, it chimed 6 times. That was the night Elliot saw the handprint. It was on the glass of the clock, pressed from the inside, faint, human. And the next morning, it was closer. 6. The clock wants a trade. Elliot finally called the antique shop, but when he asked about the clock, the old woman hung up. Panicked, he searched online, looking for any information. What he found made his stomach turn. The clock had belonged to a man named Victor Grayson, a clockmaker in 1872. One day he vanished, but his wife swore he was inside the clock, trapped, bound to it forever. And if the clock ever stopped ticking, he would come out. Elliot broke into a cold sweat, because that night, the clock was silent. 7. The man in the glass. At exactly 3 a.m., Elliot woke up. The house was too quiet. He walked downstairs, his breath fogging in the cold air. The clock stood still, the hands motionless, and in the reflection of the glass, Victor Grayson was staring at him. His stitched mouth slowly began to open. The stitches tore apart, revealing a twisted grin. Then, a whisper filled the room. "Your turn." Elliot stumbled back. No. The clock chimed once, then twice, then 3 times. The hands spun wildly. The glass shattered, and Victor stepped forward. 8. The next owner. The next morning, the antique shop received a package. A grandfather clock. Polished wood, perfect condition, no return address. The old woman stared at it. Then she checked the reflection in the glass. And there, inside the clock, was Elliot. His eyes wide, his mouth stitched shut, trapped, waiting for the next owner, for the next chime. The reflection that wasn't me. 1. The apartment with one rule. It was supposed to be a fresh start. After his breakup, Daniel Harper needed a new place, somewhere quiet, affordable, and far away from his old life. When he found a cheap apartment downtown, it seemed perfect. There was only one rule. The landlord, a tired-looking man, handed him the keys and muttered, Don't stare at your reflection too long. Daniel chuckled. What? The landlord's eyes darkened. Just trust me. Daniel didn't. He should have. 2. The first night. The apartment was simple but comfortable. A bedroom, a kitchen, a bathroom with a large mirror above the sink. Everything was fine, until the first night. Daniel was brushing his teeth when he noticed something strange. His reflection blinked too late, not by much, just a fraction of a second, but enough to make his stomach turn. He stepped back, shaking his head. I'm just exhausted. But the longer he stared, the more wrong it felt. So he turned off the light and went to bed. But even in the dark, he felt eyes on him. The reflection moves first. The next morning, Daniel avoided the mirror, but as he was leaving for work, something caught his eye. His reflection, it wasn't standing like him. It was leaning forward, closer, like it was watching him. Daniel's chest tightened. Then, his reflection smiled. Daniel hadn't smiled. He stumbled back, heart pounding. When he looked again, his reflection was normal. He left the apartment without looking back. 4. The landlord's warning. That night, Daniel knocked on the landlord's door. The old man sighed when he saw him. You saw it, didn't you? Daniel hesitated. What the hell is wrong with my mirror? The landlord rubbed his face. It's not a mirror, he whispered. Daniel's stomach dropped. What? The landlord's voice shook. It's a window. Daniel stared at him. To where? The landlord's eyes darkened. Not where. Who? 5. The thing in the glass. Daniel didn't sleep that night. The landlord's words crawled under his skin. At 3:12 a.m., he heard it. A soft tapping. He sat up, pulse hammering. It was coming from the bathroom. The mirror. The knocking grew louder. Then a whisper. Let me out. Daniel's blood ran cold. His reflection was standing there, but it wasn't him. It was grinning, and its hand was pressed against the glass. 6. The reflection wants out. Daniel stayed away from the mirror after that, but it didn't stop. Every night, the tapping returned. The whispering grew louder. Then one night, the voice changed. It sounded like him. Daniel, let me out. I want to be real. Daniel shook his head. No. Then his reflection moved on its own and whispered, then I'll take your place. Daniel froze. Then the mirror cracked. 7. The man in the mirror. Daniel ran to the landlord. It's breaking through. He gasped. The old man grabbed his coat. We don't have much time. They rushed into the apartment and stopped dead. The mirror was shattered, and Daniel's reflection was gone. Daniel's breath hitched. Where is it? The landlord's face drained of color. Then, footsteps from the bedroom. Daniel turned and saw himself, standing in the dark, smiling, but the eyes weren't his. They were black, and the voice that came from his mouth wasn't human. You shouldn't have looked so long. Then the lights went out. 8. The wrong Daniel. The next morning, the landlord received a call from Daniel. His voice sounded wrong. Thank you for your help, Mr. Langley, he said. I took care of the problem. Then he hung up. The landlord sat in silence. He knew the truth. The real Daniel was gone, and the thing from the mirror had taken his place, smiling, living, waiting for someone new to stare too long. The 13th floor 1. The elevator that shouldn't stop. When Ethan Miller moved into Blackwood Towers, he thought he had found a great deal. A high-rise apartment, modern and cheap. What more could he ask for? But on his first day, the landlord gave him a warning. Never press 13 in the elevator. Ethan laughed. There's no 13th floor. The landlord's expression darkened. That's what they want you to think. Ethan rolled his eyes. He should have listened. 2. The button that shouldn't work. For the first few weeks, everything was fine. Then, one night, as Ethan returned from work, he stepped into the elevator. He pressed 14 like always. But then the elevator jerked, the lights flickered, and without him touching it, the button for 13 lit up. Ethan's stomach twisted. The elevator descended. Ding! The door slid open. Darkness. A hallway stretched before him, long, empty, and wrong. Ethan's breath hitched, because according to the building plans, this floor didn't exist. Number 3. The hallway that went too far. Ethan stepped out. The air was thick, filled with the scent of mold and dust. The hallway stretched too long, the ceiling too low, like it was pressing down on him. He turned back, but the elevator doors had shut, His heart pounded. Then, a footstep, somewhere down the hall. Ethan froze. Hello? Silence, then a whisper. You shouldn't be here. Ethan ran for the elevator. He slammed the button repeatedly. The doors creaked open. He jumped inside, and as the doors closed, he saw it. A figure at the end of the hallway, tall, unmoving, and watching him. 4. The man who wasn't there. Back in his apartment, Ethan tried to rationalize it. A forgotten floor? A prank? But the feeling wouldn't leave him. That night, as he lay in bed, his phone buzzed. A text message. Unknown number, you went to 13. Ethan's blood ran cold. He texted back, who is this? No answer. But then, a knock on his door. Soft, rhythmic. Ethan's stomach twisted. Slowly, he stepped toward the door, and when he looked through the peephole, no one was there. 5. The elevator takes him back. The next day, Ethan decided he had to see it again. He stepped into the elevator and pressed 13. This time, the elevator plummeted, faster than it should. Ding! The doors slid open. The hallway was longer now. The lights flickered, casting shifting shadows. Ethan stepped forward. Somewhere ahead, a door creaked open. A breath of cold air rushed past him, and a whisper brushed against his ear. Come inside. 6. The room at the end. At the end of the hallway, a single door stood open. Inside, a room identical to his own apartment. Same furniture, same bed, same pictures on the wall. But then he saw it. A man, sitting on the couch, his back turned, his breath ragged. Ethan's chest tightened. Who are you? He whispered. The man's head twitched. Then, slowly, he turned. Ethan's heart stopped, because the man's face was his own. 7. The trade. The other Ethan smiled, but his eyes were black. You left the door open, he whispered. Ethan staggered back. The air grew thick, pressing against his skin. The man stood up and took a step toward him. Ethan turned to run, but the door slammed shut. The lights flickered, and everything went dark. 8. The next tenant. A week later, Blackwood Towers welcomed a new resident. A young woman moved into apartment 1405. On her first night, she stepped into the elevator, pressed 14, but the button for 13 lit up instead. The elevator descended. Ding! The doors slid open, and standing in the hallway was Ethan, smiling, waiting for someone new.